as the only way how we can solve these problems is an absolutely feasible and, I would dare to say, even realistic proposition. Now, let me touch briefly on these different crisis spots. Now, the Ukraine situation, where the news which just arrived us shortly before the beginning of this session is that presidential advisor Yermak is out. He resigned apparently in Kiev. Now, obviously, that has a lot to do with, the corruption scandal, which basically touched him in a direct way. But the situation in Ukraine is extremely hot. There was the leaking of this 28-point program, supposedly from the Trump administration, and then all hell broke loose, where the international media and the warmongers tried to present it as if this would be just a printout of the Russian program. Now, Pistorius, the German defense minister, and many others of the coalition of the willing went into an uproar saying no dictate, no territorial concessions. And actually, this plan does have some major points which address the core interests represented by Russia, but why should Russia not insist on those, given the fact that these core interests were the reason why the special military operation started in the first place? No NATO for Ukraine, Donbas will belong to the Russian Federation, and strict conditions for the rest of Ukraine. So basically, it is the advice, for example, of Harald Kujat, the former general inspector of the Bundeswehr and head of the NATO Commission, who said that Germany, France, and Great Britain should agree with this proposal because it's the best proposal in town, because if they reject it, the military operation will continue. And given the absolute massive progress Russia has been making, especially in the last several weeks, it can only end up worse with a military victory for Russia, which, according to Kujat, would have much more severe security implications for Europe. Now, what has emerged also in a way which is really unbelievable is the division in the US administration, where you have President Trump, J.D. Vance, the new Army Secretary, then Driscoll, who is now the special representative or responsible for Ukraine, and then basically Witkoff. On the one side, these are the people who are trying to implement or try to get an agreement along these 24-8 points. But then you have very openly, unbelievably openly, Marco Rubio being in an absolute opposition, flying into Geneva, lining up with the coalition of the willing, trying to, keep a counter position, basically to not give up on the war aim, to cause a strategic defeat for Russia. And obviously, then Bloomberg coming in, revealing a so-called taped telephone call of Witkoff with his Russian counterparts, which is supposedly the proof that Witkoff is just a Putin puppet, basically trying to repeat Russiagate 2.0. So now, obviously, this is an extremely heated situation where Colonel McGregor, for example, has maintained the hypothesis that a coup is in the making against Zelensky. President Putin said that in any case with Zelensky, no legal deal is possible, given the fact that he is no longer the legitimate president of Ukraine. And so the situation obviously is one of extreme flux. Now, those people who have been betting on regime change in Russia, meaning, a strategic defeat for Russia means a regime change, getting Putin out of office, possibly getting a pro-Western, more, easy to deal with government in Russia. They should really think twice, because the people, 80% of the population is backing Russia. And according to an interview done by the Hungarian journalist Eva Peli, who just made an interview with Sergei Karaganov on the 30th of October in Moscow, which I can only advise everybody to read, because it gives you an insight very much in depth of, what a certain faction of the Russian establishment is thinking. And compared to that, one can only say that President Putin is an unbelievable patient and diplomatic-oriented person, because what Karaganov says in this interview is basically, very bluntly, if there will be a big war, Europe will cease to exist. He is even alluding to the possibility that, given the fact that the European establishments, who are not reconciling themselves with the fact that the Western dominance of 500 years of colonialism is ended, and therefore have, are driven by obsessions and have lost all fear of war, including fear of nuclear war, that maybe the last resort would be to use a tactical nuclear weapon to basically, awake them back to the fear of what nuclear war means. He says naturally he doesn't want that to happen, but if that's the only way, then so be it. And obviously, his whole outlook is Eurasia. He says Europe is just an ugly outgrowth of the Eurasian continent, but essentially the Russian identity lies with Eurasia, emphasis on Asia, especially Siberia, and he has no use of a European component in this picture at all. And he dismisses, when the journalist Peli brings in the argument by Ted Postol that there is no such thing as a tactical nuclear war, he just dismisses it and says, no, it's quite possible. I don't think that that's a legitimate argument, but in any case, I think it is useful for people to read this interview, which is an excellent piece of journalism, because it shows what a journalist should go after in pursuing an issue until it is exhausted. But it should also tell people, that those who are betting on regime change in Russia are really very foolish, because they will not get somebody more friendly to the West than Putin. Now, obviously, that situation does require a solution. And if the West is insisting to keep sending weapons to Ukraine and troops, which the British are still doing, even if it would come to an agreement, their intention obviously is to prolong the war for eternity, which obviously must be prevented by all means. And the only way how that can be done is through a global security and development architecture. Now, obviously, there are many other crisis spots. I will not go into the situation in the Middle East at length, since we have Professor Falk here, who can speak about that much more insightful. I only want to mention that, it is a good sign that 11 US Democratic senators are now demanding an investigation into Israeli war crimes. So naturally, that is far too little and too late, but the Oasis plan remains of extreme urgency, and we keep organizing for the Oasis plan. Now, the other crisis spot naturally is Venezuela. where the latest is unchanged from when we had our special emergency seminar. There are 15,000 US troops in Costa Rica. The US Gerald Ford aircraft carrier, which is the largest aircraft carrier in the world, is there with 11 warships. There are reports that the US has demanded food for a long period to come as a possible indication that they plan to have a more permanent presence or long-term presence in the region. That Damocles sword is still hanging over the world. And obviously the aim against that is also, as an article in Foreign Affairs made very clear, the aim is to eliminate a country or a government of a country which is friendly to Russia, Cuba, Iran, and China, and they want to kick out such a government to drive out the influence of especially China, but also the other named countries out of the entire Latin American continent. Now, as if the world would be short of strategic crisis, I think the developments in Japan have to be taken quite seriously, because while Prime Minister Takaichi had a positive meeting with Xi Jinping in Korea, nevertheless, in a recent meeting in the parliament, she all of a sudden said that if China is engaging militarily in Taiwan, that would represent a vital security situation for Japan, which would enable Japan to intervene in Taiwan militarily. And that naturally has caused an extremely harsh reaction from the Chinese government. The reason is very obvious, because we are just experiencing the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And with that, just in September, the end of Japanese militarism, which has done enormous damage inside China. And therefore, the ghost of recurrence of Japanese militarism obviously is being taken extremely serious by China. So they have reacted extraordinarily sharply. Now, to just mention the last point, domestically inside the United States, it's also a haywire. Following the shooting of 2 National Guard members, one of which just died, the other one is in severe danger, President Trump has ordered practically the expulsion of all immigrants and stop of further immigration from all countries from the developing sector. Now that's unbelievable, and obviously the United States used to be a melting pot where everybody could become an American if they, want to immigrate. So this is and the methods with which the ICE is proceeding have been absolutely horrendous. And in line with that is obviously the rather outrageous remarks by President Trump against South Africa. Not only did the United States not participate in the G20 in Johannesburg, but Trump said afterwards that South Africa is such a country that they should not be allowed to be a member of any international organization, which is really outrageous, as is the fact that Dr. Pandor, the former foreign minister, has been denied a visa to the United States. I mean, this is the end of diplomacy, and the issue obviously is the stance South Africa has taken on the situation in Gaza, and the accusation that there is genocide against white people in South Africa is not founded to the best of our knowledge. So if you look at all of these situations, which are clearly potpourri of crisis spinning out of control, it underlines the absolute urgency that we put the new security and development architecture, which must take into account the interest of every single country in terms of security, but also in terms of development, absolutely on the table. And I can only say the fact that President Putin just basically used the same formulations like we have now been talking in the IPC every week for for many years, I do not give up the hope that we can convince even those people in Europe who seem to be out of touch with the reality of how the global majority of the world is developing, that we can change and go back to diplomacy as a way of conflict resolution and not military or other means. So given the fact that Xi Jinping also has put similar proposals on the table, the Global Security Initiative and the Global Governance Initiative, which are being heavily discussed among all countries of the Global South, it remains that we have to convince the Western nations to cooperate with the global majority. And if they would agree to do that, all problems could be solved relatively easy because the willingness on the side of the global majority to do that, to cooperate rather than have geopolitical confrontation, is absolutely there. So that's what I wanted to say in the beginning.
Thank you very much, Helga, for your opening and giving a thorough overview for all of us to situate ourselves for this meeting and our activities going into the next weeks. I want to make a quick just acknowledgement for our next couple of guests. One, we do have Professor Richard Falk, who will be going here very shortly, but we also have a special guest who is the ambassador, Abdullah Sawish. I apologize if I'm butchering your name. Also, he's from the Embassy of the Palestinian State to New Delhi, and I just want to acknowledge him, especially since it's very, very late where he is, and we appreciate you joining us for this discussion today. But we'll continue with our discussion. So next we'll go to Professor Richard Falk, who is a professor emeritus of international law at Princeton University. He also was with the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitors Chairman of the Board of Trustees and former UN Special Rapporteur of the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories from 2008 to 2014. So thank you so much for joining us, Professor Falk. We very much appreciate your insights and what you will be sharing with us today. You have the floor.
Thank you so much for those gracious introductory words, and greetings to you all. What has just been said by Helga LaRouche is very much in keeping with my own worldview, and I applaud the Schiller Institute for having developed this perspective, which I think is essential if we are to have a humane future for the species and for the natural infrastructure of the species. I have been asked to say a few words about the Gaza People's Tribunal that held its final session late in October of this year, and represents, I think, an important civil society initiative to close the gap that was created by the failure of the UN and the international system to enforce what the International Court of Justice said. In other words, it's not international law that has been disappointing during the Gaza crisis that became very dramatic after the October 7th attack on Israeli border towns in the south of the country. This tendency of the international system to fail when it comes to any kind of a strategic clash with the winners of World War II leads to a politics of paralysis. And that's really what happened with the Western liberal democracies in relation to the genocidal assault of Israel against Gaza and the Palestinian people after October 7th. And this failure to enforce international law is a political issue. It's a matter of the geopolitical actors led by the US, beyond the others, should be freed from the constraints of international law. This was the design of the UN Charter. It gave, through the veto power, the right of veto, an exemption from international law of the most powerful states in the world. And it made no sense unless the intention was to preserve the primacy of geopolitics when it came to the management of global security. In all other domains of international life, international law functions rather effectively and is intended to do because it's supported by a logic of reciprocity. That is, it's mutually beneficial to have the routine interactions among countries subject to a regulatory order in the form of international legal norms and procedures. This is not true where hard power is the main instrument of policy manipulation. And there, the design of the system, the design of this security system at the end of World War II deliberately preserved the room for maneuver on the part of the geopolitical actors, and particularly the three NATO powers and the then Soviet Union and the US. This situation blocked central political action on the part of the UN throughout the genocide crisis, and really made a mockery of the never again pledge after the Holocaust, which now can be probably rephrased more accurately as never again in a white part of the international system. In other words, it's racializing. The liberal democracies acted in a way to racialize genocide as an international crime. So it's an international crime if Russia does much less severe actions in violation of international law, whereas if Israel does them, it is a allegation without legal merit, supposedly. But this is purely double standards and moral hypocrisy to set one kind of framework for Ukraine and a contradictory one for Israel and Palestine. This by way of background to explain why the Gaza Tribunal, a people's tribunal, was formed 18 months or so ago. It represents an independent initiative, fully funded without any government source of financial support, and excluding active members of government from its operations. It was formed as people's tribunals going back to the Russell Tribunal that was formed during the Vietnam War, goes back to situations where an activated public is in radical disagreement with the policies pursued by a state, particularly a Western democratic state, where there is a tradition of dissent and protest. And it was in the context of that Russell Tribunal, which was formed by leading intellectuals of that time, Bertrand Russell and Jean-Paul Sartre of France. The idea was to mobilize global perspectives that were guided by ideas of justice more than ideas of law. And that's important in understanding this kind of initiative. It doesn't try or pretend to mimic what national courts do. And this is not surprisingly misunderstood or not understood by the mainstream media that tends to call the initiative a kangaroo court or a not giving two sides to the dispute and the conflict. And that is true. That criticism, if it is taken as a criticism, is accurate. The premise of a people's court is a partisan reaction toward the failure of the international system to implement legal norms and moral values, and should be understood in that way. Therefore, our Gaza Tribunal, which had its final session in Istanbul, had a jury of conscience, which exhibited its orientation toward law as its favorable orientation toward justice rather than a narrow subservience to law. That meant that it could examine a much wider range of issues than the International Court of Justice does, and go beyond the legal dispute that gave the ICJ jurisdiction. A people's court of this sort can define what is relevant by reference to what is just and is not constrained by the norms of a domestic or international intergovernmental court, which both the ICC and the ICJ are. So that issue of partisanship is important to acknowledge, that it doesn't pretend to give equal weight to the two sides or to adopt a neutral or objective perspective. It starts from a set of moral and political foundational principles which are related to these broader ideas of a security framework that is more responsive to international law for all actors and not just for the ones that are either not geopolitical actors themselves, as are the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, or are not protected, as Israel is, by that geopolitical room for maneuver that the winners of World War II were given and made part of the structure of international society, which, as Helga's earlier remarks suggested, were the kind of reform and unified global approach that Putin has now endorsed, and which seems something that any sensible, rational person would explore as an alternative to the chaos and the devastation that is presently occurring in a whole series of hotspots around the world. Let me just say a couple more things about the tribunal. Its justice-driven character and the readability of its final documents, the final statement of the jury of conscience, and the statement on behalf of the tribunal itself, as well as its Sarajevo Declaration, create a perspective that really does clarify what is meant by the difference between a justice-shaped form of conflict resolution and a hard power, either directly military or indirectly diplomatic form of conflict resolution. And its motivations are clearly a reaction to the failure of the formal system, but its goals are much more to stimulate solidarity initiatives with the Palestinian struggle for their basic rights, in a manner that is meaningful in the way that such solidarity initiatives proved meaningful in the struggle against South African apartheid. So that, in a sense, many Palestinians that I've had contact with are very influenced by the effectiveness of global solidarity combined with Palestinian resistance and resilience. Finally, the world is being led in a misleading and surprisingly dominant way by the Trump diplomacy, which rewards the winner, which rewards the perpetrator of genocide and punishes the victims, a real inversion of justice. And it's sort of held together very loosely and opportunistically by allowing Israel to act as if there is no ceasefire. It's committed something over 275 violations in the 40 days and has shown no interest in giving some sort of reassurance, much less participation, to the Palestinians in the context of searching for an end to the underlying conflict. But it wants an end only in accordance with a one-state Israeli solution, which is the contradiction of what the Palestinians want. And the irony is, of course, both sides want what the international system doesn't want, which is a two-state solution. So there is this additional tension. But the world, and particularly those who consider themselves activist critics of the way the world is now structured, should not be led to somehow overlook the terrible suffering that continues in Gaza. And I found it shocking that the Security Council, after all these months, finally reached a unanimous conclusion in favor of the Trump diplomacy that included several global South states and states from the Arab and Muslim majority countries. And it's a shocking disregard of not only the genocidal core of what's been going on, but its apartheid prelude and its ecological aftermath, where the Palestinians that survived are living in a wasteland without adequate food, medicine, and viable shelter. So it's the notion that the genocide is over, or that this is the day after kind of diplomatic framework, is a deception of hard power geopolitics and should not be a source of distraction. Let me stop there, and if there are any questions, of course, I'll be happy to respond.
Thank you very much, Professor Falk, for, everything that you and the team have been doing with the tribunal. This is very helpful, and I'm sure many of the participants would love to share this around. So I'll make sure to grab the link to the the proceedings and what you all have pulled together. So thank you very much. I want to go to the ambassador for his reflections, because it's very, very late for him. I would like to give Ambassador Sawish the floor. He's the ambassador of the state of Palestine to New Delhi. Please go ahead, Ambassador.
Thank you so much indeed, Anastasia, for having me tonight. And of course, many thanks to Schiller Institution also. To you, Anastasia, for your excellent coordination, Helga, for your comprehensive overview, and for sure to Mr. Richard Falk for his, as usual, as always, outstanding political, legal, historical, and of course, philosophical analysis. We are still merely describing the situation with all due respect, because this is my work. So, but we still, again, merely describing the situation, what the Palestinian indeed want on the ground, beside all the description for the situation, which is very important, but they need, or they want to challenge the existing mechanism, measures, policies, and the law of jungle to change the reality on the ground. I'm pretty sure that, put aside right now what has happened during the last 2 years, which is the televised textbook genocide that had been conducted at the hand of the American, the Israeli, and unfortunately, with many other Western countries, with full complicity of many other Western countries. But the reality also in West Bank, I'm pretty sure that you are watching to some extent what happened when the main media giant gave us the chance to shed light, to screen some of the photos and the videos that came from West Bank. We are enduring in a daily basis of terror, and I mean it, terror attacks at the hand of the Israeli settlers. Just today, the Israeli military army, which they call themselves the most moral army, had been quoted taped when they had executed 2 Palestinians whom was already surrounded, and they are already surrounded and have nothing to do. Just they decided to kill them instead of even arrested them. Very harsh reality, very harsh situation that the Palestinian is facing, not only in Gaza and West Bank, and even the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, President Abbas, is the one who's at least is still believe of the two-state solution, likewise many other, of course, countries, except of course Israel. His authority, his government is financially stifling. The financial measures, the financial strangulation that the Israeli, of course, government, Israeli authority, the occupied Israeli authority, the Israeli occupation is taking, is to bankruptcy the Palestinian people themselves, is to bankruptcy the Palestinian government, is to destroy any chance for even any future situation. When we will go to describe the situation on the ground, I'm pretty sure that you all know that how many UN resolution, how many UN, I'm sorry, how many UN reports have been issued. Just a few days ago, the UN Human Rights Council, and I think the fourth committee they submitted two reports about the settlement in West Bank and the other measures that Israel is taking. So that when we will continue to describe, there is much to talk about it. And every day we're going to find many other details, because Israel have a very important and very clear policy. The Palestinians should wake up every day with a new type of challenges. There should not deal with a limited amount of challenges. Challenges should be increases day and day after day. The question is, how could we all move from describing the situation, which is a very miserable situation, describing the situation on the ground, and to take a step forward? And again, I'm not criticizing the describing, analyzing, describing, writing about the situation, but let us be very frank. The new generation whom took the streets in the United Kingdom, Australia, and other places, the very young generation, 20, 22, 25, 20, up to 30 years old, all of them will not be able even to digest what we used to when we used to talk about the international law, a human right council, Geneva conventions, and all of these staff of material, they will not go even to digest it, but they already watch, they already digest what happened in the ground when they watched, when they realized the reality that came not through the main media, mainstream media, but through the social media itself. Then they took steps. They demonstrate in the streets. They tried to do something, at least shake the old narrative of the Zionist movement and their supporters. What I would like to say that, and I'm working here even with our supporter here in India to say that yes, sympathy, empathy is very important, but we should work together to change the reality on the ground. All the sympathy and the empathy that we used to receive it here in India and everywhere else in around the world will not put some beans, cooked beans, in one of the plates for the children, so that sympathy and empathy should become real measures, should become real policy, should become something to change the reality on the ground. And to do so, at least, if we will not going to change the reality on the ground, I mean, to support the Palestinian physically directly, but at least to stop the Israeli occupation, to stop the Israeli occupation, there is a lot of measures, a lot of tools that we can use it. All of these tools, all of these measures is legal, diplomatic, tested, uh, non-violence, and all of these stuff. Just let us raise our voice loud and clear and to say it's time to boycott the Israeli occupation regime itself. Not as a government at the level of the government, but at the level of the individual. We should now change our at least our our wording to take a step forward to shed light on the measures that the international community, the individuals can take it so that they can change the harsh reality on the Palestinian people. If we believe all that, everyone worldwide can be a game changer, we should all together come to say that time to change the reality, time to change even our narrative about or to concentrate on how to change the reality. Our narrative is to become how to concentrate on how to change the reality. And in this connection, it should be very clear, very loud. Our voice should be very loud, very clear. Time to boycott the Israeli occupation and time to boycott everyone, every company, every institution that is supporting the Israeli occupation. Everyone is working to entrench the footprint of the Israeli occupation in West Bank. It's unacceptable right now to say that we are all, as international communities, against the Israeli settlement. Then the one who's representing Israel in X or Y country is a settler, terrorist settler. One word loud and clear should not be acceptable. Also, we cannot say that we are, as international community, and use the settlement and is the main barriers to the two-state solution and the peace process. Then our shelves, our market shelves is flooded with the settlement product. We cannot say that we are against the settlement. Then part of our investment, uh, our individual investment is going to the settlement project itself. So that it's time at least to concentrate on practical measures that we can take it. We can take it as individuals. We can shed light on it as individual, as expert in the international law, as expert in the politics and all of these stuff, just to start raising our voice and focusing on some measures that can be and can change the reality. Let me just conclude by saying that these measures we already tested it many decades ago when we took that not all as also as only at the governmental level, at the state level, but as individual. And that I was very young when we start talking about the apartheid regime in South Africa. At least at that time, we used to send letters against this apartheid regime, because this is the only issue was at that time was at our hand. But there is a lot of tools that we can take it, we can use it, we can talk about it, that for sure will pressure Israel to end its occupation. Just one thing we can call for the international community is to boycott the traveling to Israel. It's very important, and we already saw a lot of examples when someone of them um, uh, owner of the restaurants in Spain and other places, when those owners refuse at least to receive those Israeli, not as Israeli, of course, as Israeli, because of the war of Gaza, and because how did they act in the restaurant. So that it affect and it make some change, and we can do something very significant also with the pressure that the Palestinian right now is facing. The financial pressure. We can do something very significant if the international community, 1 out of each 1,000 person from all around the world, decided to pay to the Palestinian 1 penny per month. It will change the reality of the Palestinian. But because, again, today, for example, UNRWA, United Nations entity that is dealing with the Palestinian refugees, is starving. UNRWA itself is facing a miserable financial situation. It's time to support. It's time to do something, at least can be measurable. It's time to do something, yes, legal and very peaceful, but these things that we can do it as international community, as individuals, can change the reality on the ground. With that, sorry, it is my maybe 15 hours. I'm working, so that sometimes it's not easy to continue for all of this for this very long time. But I gonna stop here, and I would like to thank you so much for having me tonight. I wish to be with you again, but in different
Thank
time.
you.
But I know that time zone sometimes is not helping, but I will do my ultimate best in this regard. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Sawish, for joining us, giving your perspective, your thoughts, reflections on what is happening. We greatly appreciate you joining us and staying on, it being so late for you, with with all of us discussing here today. I would like to go to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, see if you have a response or thoughts from the discussion so far.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Professor Falk for your clarification of the legal situation and the intention of the tribunal. I think this was extremely helpful, and we will for sure help to make the results of the tribunal known. And I want to also answer Your Excellency, Ambassador Abdullah. When one listens to you, one has a feeling of absolute outrage about what is happening. And, one has to combat the feeling of helplessness. And while, I completely understand what you are calling for, I still want to say that, we continue to fight for the Oasis plan. We will have another physical conference in Denmark in the next several weeks before Christmas, where we will try to create an international audience for the implementation of the Oasis plan, which I absolutely still think you need to have a vision of hope for the future if you want to move the people on the ground and internationally. Having said that, I absolutely also believe that even the OASIS plan, while it is a way of dealing with the crisis on the ground, will only be possible if one addresses the larger topic of, that the old order is falling apart. And as I said in my initial remarks, for me, all of these crises are sort of only symptoms of a collapsing order of the last 500 years. And while each situation has its historic specificities, like obviously the history of Israel and Palestine, and the history of Ukraine and Venezuela and so forth and so on, the common denominator is that the old order is not agreeing to the emergence of a new order, and therefore all the different ethnic, historic crises and specificities are being used to derail the emergence of a new order. Because if you had the idea of a new economic system based on such conceptions as being brought forward by the BRICS and the SCO, the development of the Middle East would be a natural aspect of it. Once you would have an agreement among the larger powers to cooperate. And I think that since we are emerging, and we will hear shortly of that from Dennis Small, since the whole thing is fueled by the pending threat of a collapse of the financial system, and unless we address these issues and replace them with a new economic paradigm of the whole world, a new security paradigm, which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet and catapults the whole discussion on a new paradigm, I don't think that any of the regional crises can be solved. But if we move to get the new architecture, I'm absolutely optimistic that all of these issues can be addressed. So I think we need to put much more emphasis and much more discussion on how we actually can respond to the proposals now on the table, naturally foremost our own proposal for the new security and development architecture. Then you have now Putin's proposal, Xi Jinping's proposal, and all of these are very similar, and they need to be put on the agenda in a serious way and with urgency. So while I'm not discouraging the steps you are taking, I would say that since I'm convinced that the only way how we can really get out of this crisis is the way I just mentioned, that I would also, like to inspire other people on this panel in the following discussion, that we really think what we can do more to get a more awareness of all people of goodwill about that need to really change the paradigm for good, or we will not make it as a mankind.
Thank you very much, Helga, for your response and reflections. I'd like to go to John Steinbach, who is the Hiroshima-Nagasaki Peace Committee of the National Capital Area. He is, I believe, the president of that. Is that right, John? I know that you have reflections as well for this discussion so far.
Yeah, thank you, Anastasia. Yeah, I'm the coordinator, de facto coordinator. Our committee's been around since 1981, and we do a lot of work with A-bomb survivors and radiation survivors, and work toward nuclear abolition. It's again, I really appreciate being asked to reflect. Dr. Falk, it's really an honor to hear you. And I would say that you have been, I don't know you, but you have been a personal inspiration to me. You and Professor Boyle, Francis Boyle, who's no longer with us. To my mind, you two reflected the conscience of humanity. So, and please excuse me if I sound a little disjointed, because I'm going to try to keep my comments to 3 minutes, and I've been taking notes. So it's going to be a little bit disjointed. So I want to go back to Helga's initial talk. And she talked about, she talked about Russian allusions to the use of tactical nuclear weapons. And she talked about the loss of fear of nuclear war, that we used to be afraid and now we really aren't. I wanted to say that the U.S. also has a policy of using tactical nukes. In fact, during Trump's administration, when Bolton and some of the other neocons were really riding high, there was discussion about actually using tactical nuclear weapons in order to regain the credibility of deterrence, which really isn't about deterrence at all. It's about the ability to escalate up the nuclear ladder at every level, including strategic. So the U.S. always comes out on top. So, and just to read a very brief statement here, this is from 1977. This was when Carter was running for president, he actually was president, and he was talking about reducing nuclear warheads to 200 warheads. And the response of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was, U.S. nuclear strategy maintains military strength sufficient to provide a warfighting capability to respond to a wide range of conflict in order to control escalation and terminate the war on terms acceptable to the United States. Just as absolutely as clear as it is that these people are insane, and we really need to reflect on where we are today with New START expiring on February 6th, and that leaves us only with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which has also for the last 20 years been in chaos as the nuclear powers refuse to abide by their responsibility. Shifting very briefly to Israel, there's been a lot of discussion, and a lot of us, there are two different sides. I mean, some of us support a two-state solution, some support a one-state solution. I kind of go with Edward Said, and I think I think also where Professor Falk is, and Said talked about that it really has to be a one-state solution, that a two-state solution would inevitably end up that there would never be a viable Palestine in any real sense of the word. It would just be unacceptable to Israel, unacceptable to the United States, and that in the end, and Said thinks it would take 100 or more years, but in the end, it would have to be one land, two peoples or all peoples actually. And just to briefly wrap things up here, somebody referred to the new peace deal as being isolated concentration camps within a huge concentration camp. That's what the de facto result of Trump's peace proposal would be. And then I just want to reflect very briefly, looking at Israel. So Israel today is ruled by a coalition that is de facto a Meir Kahane government, or maybe in some ways even worse than Meir Kahane. Where we have major cabinet ministers that have pictures of Goldstein, Emmanuel Goldstein, who killed all of the Muslim worshippers on the wall. These are the people that are running Israeli policy. It's no longer a secular dispute over land. It's now become a religious dispute, and overwhelmingly Israel that has turned this into a religious dispute. So those are my reflections. I wish I had an optimistic vision of the future, Helga, for you. And certainly it's going to take the world opinion. The world popular opinion already says, abolish nuclear weapons and peace with justice in Palestine. So the challenge is turning that overwhelming popular opinion globally into a political reality. And thank you again, Anastasia.
Thank you, John, for joining us and being part of the discussion. I'll see if maybe Professor Falk or if Helga Zepp-LaRouche, if they have a response to any of your thoughts so far. Professor Falk, you're muted, my friend, if you're trying to speak. There we go.
Let me first just thank John for his gracious comments and for his own steady commitment to a world without nuclear weapons and with respect for the rights of people, including the Palestinians. And I feel that there is a mobilization taking effect at this point that's wider than Gaza. It was foreshadowed, I think, by Helga's introductory remarks, and it is basically a commentary on the difficulties of transition to a new order. And many of us are familiar with the Gramsci statement that in periods where the old order is dying and the new order hasn't yet been born, monstrosities occur. And I think we're in that kind of transitional moment. Whether the new order emerges in its more barbaric form or as a pathway to a humane and ecologically attuned future is problematic, of course. It can't be taken as a foregone conclusion that the new order will supplant what exists in an altogether positive way. And the transition may be longer than any of us wish or live, probably. So we're in a very unusual period in history, I think, where people of conscience and commentators on the world historical situation are convinced that we need an alternative framework to manage global security and prevent genocide, ecocide, apartheid. And we don't know quite how to achieve that transition. Where can we make the emergence of a more activist global conscience a sufficient force for transformation to allow us to shape a politics or a political project that produces this new architecture of security and peace with justice. That's the challenge I see emerging from our comments and discussion this morning. At least morning for me.
Thank you, Professor Falk. Helga?
Well, I both share the concern, but I'm moderately optimistic for the very simple reason that, if you look at what is coming from many leaders of the global south, not just the big ones, like Xi Jinping and Putin and Modi and Lula and so forth, but there are also many secondary leaders in African nations, young people who are totally determined that they will fight to have a future. And I think that if there's any hope for humanity, it is these young people. We had just a conference of the Schiller Institute in Paris, where we tried to focus on the need to build a new international youth movement. And we had young people from Mexico, Brazil, Kenya, Uganda, many other countries, European countries. And, we are intending to make that grow. So I'm calling on all people who are participating in this session. We will have another youth Zoom conference in about 2 weeks. And if you are in any part of the world and agree that we need a youth movement, an international youth movement who demands a new paradigm, because I think if we are able to encourage that, they will have the force to be the absolute balance, that what tilts the balance to being successful. So I would really, just say that the global majority is 85% of the people. And many of the countries are very, very far advanced. They are much more future-oriented than anybody in Europe or in the United States. And I think we have to really work hard to get people in the United States and in European countries out of this artificial bubble in which they live, which has been created by the mass media control, by the official narratives, which are trying to tell them one story about reality, while the reality is a completely different one. We are ending a 500-year era of colonialism, slavery, imperialism, exploitation, and misery for the vast majority of the world population, and the absolute concrete possibility of building a new system. The fact that the SCO countries on the 1st of September of this year have decided to really move in earnest to create a new economic system, to create a new development bank, the SCO bank. This is going not as quickly as one would wish, but I think the combined power of Russia, China, the BRICS countries, the SCO countries, and the willing and the desire of the global South to create a system where every country on the planet can develop their natural rights for development. I think it's not stoppable unless you have a global nuclear war. But hopefully, the people who are having the finger on the button realize that there can be no winner if that would happen, and that maybe we can initiate quickly enough a debate about the need, what are the principles on which such a new architecture should be built. And I would really urge people to read my 10 principles, because this is a proposal I made already 2 years ago, which I think is a good starting point. And we need a much, much broader discussion about what should the new paradigm look like.
Thank you, Helga. I'm including in the chat your 10 principles for people to grab and look at. If you're on over any of the broadcasting channels, you can go to the Schiller Institute website and find it there. It's one of the top items on the website. And also I'm including the RSVP page for the youth conference coming up December 14th. And I've included your website as well, Professor Falk, for the GazaTribunal.com for people to see those proceedings. So thank you all very much. What I'd like to do, just given the time, and we have a few more speakers, I think we should continue with our agenda, and then absolutely we will come back for more questions. We're already getting lots, my phone's buzzing, there's lots of hands coming up and questions being submitted. So thank you all so much for the discussion, and we shall continue. So next, I just want to announce that unfortunately, Larry Johnson had to hop off. He had another engagement, so he won't be joining us. And also our friend, I'm sorry, let me pull up his name. Anyway, I'll come back to it.
Professor Alexander Bobrov.
Professor Alexander Bobrov, thank you so much. got jumbled here with my previous agenda and the current one. He couldn't join us today. He got tied up as well, but I'm sure we'll have him as well as Larry Johnson on for future meetings. So next I'd like to go to Dennis Small, who is not only the co-moderator of the International Peace Coalition, but is also head of the Ibero-American desk for the Executive Intelligence Review magazine. Please go ahead, Dennis Small.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is where we get optimistic because the solutions are absolutely at hand, as Helga said. And in addition to the overwhelming drive historically of what's going on, there is a clear pathway, an economic pathway to resolve the underlying problem. A number of speakers have said, what in the world is stopping the West from taking a sensible approach, a reasonable approach to working things out? Well, have you ever heard of Wall Street? Have you ever heard of the City of London? And this is why Lyndon LaRouche, going back a number of years, pointed in particular to the importance of returning to the 1933 Glass-Steagall standard under Franklin Delano Roosevelt as the first of 4 necessary steps to actually resolve the underlying problem of the breakdown of the global system and replace it with one which answers the needs of the population, East and West, North and South. Now, first, just to tell you a little bit about what Glass-Steagall says. It's a law that was passed in 1933 under Roosevelt. It's 37 pages as printed in the Congressional record, H.R. 5661. And really, all you really need to hear is the opening paragraph, which says the following: an act to provide for the safer and more effective use of the assets of banks, to regulate interbank control, to prevent the undue diversion of funds into speculative operations, and for other purposes. To prevent the diversion of funds into speculative operations. This is a kind of preamble to the law, and it has many details which are, of course, quite important in and of themselves, but that preamble states the intent. No speculation, credit for production. It's not unlike the preamble to the Constitution of the United States, which declares an intent, which is an overriding intent of the entire Constitution, and says to remind ourselves who are Americans and to also advise others who are not on this call, the preamble of the 1787 Constitution says, "We the people of the United States," that part is often cited, "in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare," and I emphasize that, promote the general welfare, "and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States of America." Now, the Glass-Steagall standard indicated exactly what I just read, that there should be no speculation. In 1999, the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed by act of Congress under the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. President Clinton had actually been fighting against the repeal of the law, but then something happened, which was the whole Monica Lewinsky incident, which completely changed the course of the Clinton administration, both on the international front and on this front. Despite all of his other foibles, this was kind of the coup de grace. And in fact, for that reason, I would propose that we rename the bill ending Glass-Steagall the Gramm-Leach-Bliley-Lewinsky Act, because that's what it actually was. Now, what I want to do is to briefly focus on 3 features to try to give people a concept of what's involved in a return to the Glass-Steagall standard in today's world. First, to look at this from the standpoint of the United States. Second, to look at the issue of Glass-Steagall, or bank separation, from the standpoint of the global South, or a third world country. And third, to look at the overall intent, the global intent. Now, first, with regard to the United States banking system, there are 4 principal banks in the United States holding 90% of all of the derivatives in this country. Those banks are JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Global Sachs, right? Citigroup, and Bank of America. In order to bail them out after the 2008 crisis, what was done was a massive policy of what is called quantitative easing, which I'm showing you on the screen here, a graphic which shows how from 2007 through 2021, over $20 trillion in funny money was issued, and then a vast increase after that. It came out at over $27 trillion total. This went to the derivatives bubble. It did not go to productive investment. And I next want to show you what has happened inside the US banking system. This is a graphic developed by my colleague, Paul Gallagher, economics editor at EIR magazine. And what this shows is deposits into the banking system. That is to say, money coming in, supposedly from savings by citizens, but also money fed into the banking system by the Federal Reserve through quantitative easing. That's on the one hand, deposit, and loans is what would supposedly be productively issued for the purpose of economic activity. So if you look back to 1997, deposits and loans were pretty much equal. And then over the next 10 years to December 2007, at the point of the big crash, they both increased, but they increased pretty much equally. There was no big difference in the rate of increase. Then comes a speculative binge. And over the next 9 years, 10 years, to December 2016, the amount of deposits coming into the banking system through that quantitative easing that I just showed you, that rose by over almost $5 trillion in that period, whereas loans issued increased by $2 trillion and change. So the money in was twice as large as the money going out to supposed productive activity. Of course, it wasn't productive at all. But then the final period to 2021, over a 5-year period, deposits, money in from the Fed, increased dramatically by 6.64 trillion. Loans only rose by 1.6 trillion, 4 times the amount of deposits compared to loans. In other words, you've got a tendency of total hyperinflation, which is in fact going on under these circumstances. Now, even the money that did go out in the form of loans, we have documented and checked this out very closely. This did not go for the purpose of actual productive lending. What it actually went to is, and I guess the best way to show that is on the next graphic, which I have here, which is this one. This shows the total rise in world derivatives and the stock market and debt up through 2023, reaching a total of $2.1 quadrillion, and that's a 2 followed by 15 zeros. There was almost no money lent out by the banking system. Some was lent, but none of it went into actual productive activity. What did go went into speculative activity in the real estate market. It went into speculative activity in the stock market, and so on and so forth. So this is where we now stand inside, if we look at the US banking system, where the speculative cancer has taken control over the host economy. And that means we've got a real problem where we have to make sure that through Glass-Steagall, actual credit issued in the economy does not go to the cancer, and that it does go to productive activity. Otherwise, the entire world financial system is going to blow up. And Glass-Steagall is designed to do exactly that. It separates productive banking, commercial banking, from speculative banking. And the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which was set up under Glass-Steagall as well, designed to defend the depositors' citizens' deposits for productive activity, and which got converted into a government bailout of the Wall Street banks. The FDIC's initial purpose must return to protecting and defending only the productive banking sector of the economy. The rest of it should be reorganized, put on hold, frozen, and not be allowed to continue to dominate the global economy. That's why Glass-Steagall is so important. Total separation of the banking system. Now, let's look at this same issue briefly through the eyes of a third world country. Let's take the case of Mexico, which I've chosen among other reasons because I'll be followed in my remarks by Alberto Vizcarra of Mexico discussing that situation. Mexico's leading banks running the Mexican banking system are BBVA, a Spanish bank run out of London, Citibanamex, which is Citibank run out of Wall Street, Banco Santander, a Spanish bank run out of London, and HSBC Bank, Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, run by Dope Incorporated, centered in the city of London. Now, their control over the financial system of Mexico is absolute. It is not run by Mexicans. It's run by this global cancer. The actual interest rate in the Mexican economy today, the central bank rate is 7.25%, but that's the rate at which companies cannot borrow money. If they want to borrow, the average rate is 11.2%. And if you thought interest rates on credit cards in the United States are high, in Mexico, they range from 25% up to 150%. That's a credit card. That's what most people rely on to actually survive. Now, this is clearly a formula for a blowout. Prices in Mexico are not determined by supply and demand. They are not determined by the needs of Mexico. They are determined, as Alberto will show us, in the case of agriculture, by the Chicago Board of Trade, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which is more than Wall Street, the central place in the entire world for derivatives trading. So the food that Mexicans eat is determined by the speculation on the global derivatives bubble of 2.1 quadrillion. Now, what does Mexico need to do? Well, the same thing we need here. For them, Glass-Steagall, since they have a national bank of their own, means they have to establish exchange controls. They have to prevent the dollar system and the Fed's speculative dollar system from determining their economy. So you do that with exchange controls. It's the exact same thing as Glass-Steagall. And then you have to have physical economic development through credit issued by a national bank in Mexico for the purposes of development and working with other countries. Now, for those who say it'll never work, may I suggest that you look at what has happened in the case of China as compared to the transatlantic sector. This is over the period from to 2016. So this is older data, but the newer data confirms this and then some. And you can see that whereas in the transatlantic center, 100% of all credit issued went to the speculative sector. And I investigated this closely line item by line item. Nothing productive. And in the case of China, there is a tiny speculative sector, which they're on top of. The vast majority of the 10 trillion issued went to productive activities. So this is the kind of model of what in fact can be done. Now, let me conclude with my third point, which is how do you make these decisions? And I want to return to what Linda LaRouche always said about Glass-Steagall, which it is only the first step in the direction of a total change in the system. And this is where you get really optimistic about the possibilities. Yes, it's difficult. If it were simple, it would have been done, but it's absolutely doable. And the way to think of this is actually taking it from the top down, from the future backwards. Where do we want to be? What's the intent of Glass-Steagall, which is why LaRouche refers to the Glass-Steagall standard. This applies to the United States. It applies to the global South. It's a world global Glass-Steagall that's needed. Where we need to be is an economy where the potential relative population density of all nations and of the human species as a whole increases both in longevity in standard of living and in access to advanced science and technology. And to do this requires an emphasis on advanced science and technology such as fusion energy, space science, and so on. Very well. To do that, what do you have to do? Well, you have to have great infrastructure projects globally, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, such as what the BRICS are trying to do, that brings all countries together around a common purpose, the common goals of mankind. Fine. To get great infrastructure projects, how do you do that? Well, you have to have a credit system. You have to have credit that's created, channeled exclusively to productive activity and not to speculation. Internationally, you need things like the Asian International Investment Bank, the new Development Bank of the BRICS, and so on. On the national scale, such as in the United States, you need a national bank like Washington's National Bank, Lincoln's National Bank, or a nationalized Federal Reserve Bank, so that the credit issued does not go to the cancer, but to productive activity. Good, so we need credit system. To get that, you have to have a global Glass-Steagall. You cannot keep feeding the cancer. Internationally, this means fixed exchange rates among sovereign currencies so that you can have investment and trade on a predictable basis. And to do that, you must have exchange controls. Every sovereign country must be able to determine the value of its own currency without being flooded by speculative, cancerous financial instruments from the global banking system. Inside the United States, that translates into FDR's Glass-Steagall approach. And of course, one has to write off, and here I say 1.5 quadrillion in the cancer. That's because I did this little chart about 3 or 4 years ago when the cancer was only 1.5 quadrillion. I decided not to update it to today just to make the point. We're now over 2 quadrillion. We have to do something. And just as a final note, I do think that what will be required is to try and jail those who are responsible for the genocide, both in Gaza and globally, that this international system has carried out. So these are measures which are established, they're doable, they're within our history in the United States, and they are front and center in the agenda of the Global South. It's absolutely doable, and that's, I think, the basis for the necessary optimism.
Thank you very much, Dennis Small. And I can already anticipate a handful of people asking me for your slides. So if you wouldn't mind putting them in the chat, I'm positive people will want to use them in their organizing. So please put that there. Thank you very much. So we'll continue with the agenda. Next, I'd like to go to Alberto Vizcarra. Thank you so much for joining us. He's from Mexico, and he's an advisor of the National Front for Saving Mexican Agriculture. And this is incredibly important that you're on today, given the various protests and activities that are happening. So please go ahead, Mr. Vizcarra. You have the floor.
Gracias, Anastasia. Habría que precisar que participo en la coordinación nacional del Frente por el Rescate del Campo Mexicano. Me gustaría retomar un ángulo rápido sobre la participación de Richard Paul, del señor Falk, en donde hizo la diferenciación entre lo que es la ley y lo que es la justicia. Me parece pertinente para el proceso de discusión que tenemos, especialmente bajo el convencimiento de que toda norma, toda estructura legal debe de estar alumbrada por el propósito de la justicia. Y en este sentido, la ley se tiene que normar a los fines y a los reclamos que la justicia en su sentido universal reclama para la existencia humana y para la existencia de las naciones. En este sentido, creo importante que reconociendo este concepto uno puede elegir el optimismo. El optimismo no viene a nosotros como un áurea sentimental, sino viene como resultado de una elección personal. Elegimos ser optimistas y una vez que elegimos ser optimistas, alimentamos ese optimismo en principios, en propósitos y lo enriquecemos en base al intercambio con las demás personas y con los países. En ese sentido, me gustaría rescatar algo que LaRouche insistió durante muchos años sobre la importancia estratégica internacional entre México y los Estados Unidos. Y él siempre subrayó que había una intimidad histórica en la relación entre México y los Estados Unidos. Una hermandad de dos países que reúnen en términos de su conformación constitutiva principios comunes que se reflejaron precisamente en los momentos del siglo antepasado en la alianza
configured at the beginning of the 19th century with the alliance with Benito Juarez, and this is why we use that image of Juarez and Lincoln as the motif for our recent conference, as well as an alliance between Roosevelt and President Cardenas in Mexico, both of which, unfortunately, were abandoned as a result, and the structures that resulted from these common efforts were known after 1982 through the mid-90s, were sacrificed to the North American Free Trade Agreement, and has been renamed more recently. This is a superstructure that was imposed on North America, particularly the relations between the United States and Mexico. It was designed not to promote the development of the United States or to promote development in Mexico or even Canada, because indeed it was a trade system designed to increase through the principle of earning, profits enlargement to feed a growing monetary dominion over the financial system at the expense of fundamental productive process in the area of infrastructure such as water services to countries that are sharing and that are using this system. We recently had, as I would like to point out, we had a discussion among United States, Mexican, South American, Central American agricultural producers. We discussed the we studied the fact that the structures that govern the trade and agricultural production are the same that run the monetary and speculation worldwide system. These processes imposed on the Mexican economy obviously suppress the most important sectors of the Mexican economy, which are agricultural production, because once this treaty, this NAFTA, I repeat, was imposed without any consultation with the various national players, it was imposed by supranational bodies, and Mexico capitulated, which led to opening the borders to indiscriminate imports of grains under the free trade fallacy that it is cheaper to import food than produce it nationally. Just to give you an idea of what this meant, when this treaty was signed, Mexico was only importing 1 million tons of corn. Currently, at the close of this year, we will be, our total imports of corn will be close to 28 million tons. Now, this stimulation of dependency was not accidental. It was a deliberate policy to make Mexico dependent on a growing importation of grains, as well as with other grains, such as rice, wheat, rice practically disappeared from the Mexican national market. More than 90% of this key staple item is imported from abroad. And as has said, as our peasants say, well, the skinniest dog gets all the fleas, and this is what led to the huge crisis that has blown up with the collapse of the producers and their organization into various bodies. And we have been carrying out mobilizations over the last few days in which more than 25 states of the Federation are engaging in blockades and customs boycotts to block the importation of these grains. A national mobilization which is acquiring growing dimensions because the Mexican agriculture is becoming a locomotive to attract other sectors. Just recently, the transport associations have joined forces with this resistance to the destruction of not only Mexican agriculture, but all of its economic productive powers. The main demands of these mobilizations is indeed to grow these basic grains in Mexico, to market them directly in the Chicago exchange, which are being traded not in accordance with the costs of production at the national level, but in terms of the pricing structures of these cartels, which have become even more powerful than the Wall Street financial cartels in terms of their influence in the financial sphere. And this has led to a black hole in which a good part of the productive capacity of the West is sinking into. In many of our productive capacities, and especially that of food. This is where our demand to peg our national production to Pemex to national production, and this is we seek to end discriminate import of foreign grains and an establishment of a national bank that makes a sovereign policy possible that will meet the needs of the primary economic sector and be put a break on this decapitalization process that our national production has undergone. This is clearly a fight that carries an international dimension, but we go back to 1982 when Mexico had the debt crisis under the government of José López Portillo. Today, Mexico is in a more favorable situation. Back then, Mexico was left alone, and we remember very well when President López Portillo said, "Today it is Mexico against the world," which is most politicians did not understand. But now there is a different international dynamic. And in fact, we've received news that the BRICS grouping is creating a special exchange or to counteract this policy of speculation at the Chicago Board of Trade. So we are intervening directly in the international market to redefine the infrastructure of national production. And we are seeking to develop international cooperatives which will regulate production of food and end the blackmail on national governments and implement those policies are in fact driving a policy of population reduction based on shrinkage of this great mobilization, which took place yesterday, had 17 points of interception of public motorways, roads, and so forth, which was after a very stiff negotiations with the federal government, reached an agreement to turn over the trade, the trade of agricultural products to the producers, and most emphatically, an agreement with the various ministries to revisit the participation of Mexico in the NAFTA, the North America, and the TEMEC, the new NAFTA, and its participation in the Chicago Board of Trade. So we are establishing a beachhead to recover our national policy, and in the sense that of what Lopez Portillo said when we nationalized the Mexican national banking system with a control chain. He said that Mexico is on the verge of establishing a policy for Mexico, which will benefit Europe and the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Vizcarra. This development with the BRICS is actually very, very interesting. So thank you so much for joining us today. We will be moving on to the discussion period. I'll make the general announcement and we'll move on to that. If you are on YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, X, wherever this is being broadcast, and you would like to join the discussion period, you must be registered to participate. You can do that by going to schillerinstitute.com, and right on the top of the page, one of the sliders is the RSVP page to do that. So schillerinstitute.com and the RSVP page at the top. And with that, Dave, please let me know and we've cut the stream.